Hey everyone, welcome to Gen X Marks the Spot. I'm here with my good friend Brian from the Front Porch Conservative. Today we're going back in time and then back again as we're looking at the historical and geopolitical history of the Israeli-Palestinian Gaza situation. Um, we know that can tweak a lot of interest and also be a little polarizing. We're going to do our best to keep it neutral over here and talk about it purely from a historical perspective. And I'm going to handle the historical because I used to teach it and I love it, and I can run off at the mouth for hours. So if I start doing that, please remind me. And then Brian, who is much better at geopolitics, will get into that part of it, and then we'll work our way forward. But Brian, tell everybody who you are, where they can find you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Brian Trippett. I am known as the Front Porch Conservative. You can find me on Twitter at the Front Porch C1. You can also find me on YouTube and Rumble, where I have channels there. I do live streams Monday through Thursday at 7:30 Eastern, called Chatting on the Porch, and I do a live stream on Saturday mornings called Front Porch Brunch. We get together and talk about news, politics, culture. We get into all kinds of things. For some strange reason at this time of the year, we're talking a lot about election stuff. I have no idea why. But if you like a healthy dose of that sort of thing, I have got, no offense to Tracy, I've got what I think is the best daggone audience on the internet. If nothing else, they keep me on my toes. So come be a part of Fedora Nation. All it takes is a subscription to my YouTube and Rumble channels. It would be greatly appreciated.
Definitely go do it. He's got one of the best geopolitical channels on the internet, in my opinion. For me, you know where to find me. I'm right here. I'm also on Rumble. I'm still Keto and Crime over there, and on X or Twitter at Gen X Marks. You can find me there. I'm a recent convert to Twitter, so I'm not as busy over there as Brian is, but I'm learning. But if you want to follow me, definitely go ahead. But let's talk history. So when I first started this endeavor to research as much on this as I could, I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of listening, and I said, okay, I'll just go back to the formation of Israel around 1947, 1948, and hey Sasquatch, how are you, buddy? And then work my way forward. I realized to really understand what's going on, you got to go back thousands of years before that. So literally, I had to go back all the way to ancient Mesopotamia and look at where both of these people involved in this conflict came from, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and find out their origins, where they came from, and why this particular piece of land is causing such a stink. And to do that, I need to do a brief screen share and kind of go over a map here. So we're going to go back to ancient Israel. If it will load.
Technology, you gotta love it when it's working.
Exactly. So I'll try to pull this up as large as I possibly can. So basically, this is the area. Now, this is ancient Israel. This is around the time of the United Kingdom of Israel, which was 10 of the 12 tribes, and then the Kingdom of Judah. Over here to the side, this is the little strip of land right now that is being highly contested. This is the Gaza Strip. So where did the Kingdom of Israel came from? Now, I'm going to try to take this historical. There will be some biblical references, but if you really get into this, you'll realize that the Bible gets quite a few things correct. You know, a lot of it is legend, a lot of it is, religious propaganda in a way, but it gets a lot of things right. So in this area, which at the time was controlled, this entire strip here from here to here was basically controlled by a group of people known as the Canaanites. And you've heard of the Canaanites in the Bible. They are one of the first people that the kingdom of Israel, or that Israel conquered when they came out of Egypt into the promised land of Canaan. This whole thing was known as Canaan. Now, what most historians believe is that the Israelites were part of Canaan. They were a tribe of Canaan. They were a culture that was in Canaan. They were just a Canaanite culture, which is probably why there's not a whole lot of archaeological evidence about them being slaves in Egypt. There's not a whole lot. There's the biblical record. Nothing else has any record of that. Even though there was a record of, there's not a whole lot of record about the Israelites themselves being slaves in Egypt, if that makes sense, Brian.
It does. It does
Okay.
indeed.
But there are archaeological and historical references outside of the Bible for Canaanites being slaves in in Egypt. So what a lot of people believe is that Israel was simply a culture within the greater Canaanite area that actually became prominent and ended up absorbing everything else. And if you look at everything, I think that's kind of what happened. So they were slaves in Egypt to a point, and then they ended up coming back to their native land, if that makes sense.
It does.
So then you have, Saul, David, the temple being built by Solomon, and then you have the splitting of the two kingdoms into Israel and Judah, with Judah's capital being at Jerusalem and Samaria being the capital of the kingdom of Israel. Over here, you have what is now known as Palestine. This really didn't have a name in the ancient world, but it was controlled by a people of seafaring people known as the Philistines. And the Philistines had 5 distinct city-states that they operated out of. And among them was the city of Gaza. And so I started tracking the history of the city of Gaza, and that's how I got a lot of my comprehensive history of this whole strip. So you had the Philistines. They were from Greece. They were a fishing people and a pillaging people, and they came over and they engaged in a war with Israel. And they were eventually defeated by Israel and ended up being absorbed into the greater Canaanite culture. So they kind of disappeared. If you go forward a few hundred years in the record, they just sort of disappear. So you've heard the old rumor, Brian, that the Palestinians are the Philistines.
I've heard that.
Doesn't exactly hold water.
Mm-hmm.
That's
why they call it a rumor.
Yeah, they just sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. Probably because they were just absorbed into Israelite. Canaanite was what it was called in the Bronze Age. In the Iron Age, it was Israel. So they were just absorbed into Canaan, or Israel as we know it. And then you had enter a few hundred years of Israel and Judah being conquered and scattered. You had Nebuchadnezzar, you had the Assyrians, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, you had the Assyrians. You had all of these people coming in and conquering this whole area from here to here and occupying it. And then you have eventually, people like, even before that, there was Alexander the Great. There was a lot of other people. A lot of people have owned this strip of land. That's the bottom line. And then you finally have the Romans under Pompey coming in and conquering this entire land. Now, the Romans were the first ones to call this area, because of the large amount of Jews that lived in this area. They renamed most of this land as Judea. But because the Jews had a tendency to rebel, and they had to put down many, many rebellions, the Romans had a disdain for the Jews. And so just to prick them a little bit, they did call this area over here Palestine, after their old enemies, the Philistines. So it was really just a jab at the Jews by the Romans. But it wasn't a country as we know it. In fact, it was all under the control of Herod the Great, the great Roman governor of this area. After the Romans, you had more conquerors coming in from both the east and the west, including Genghis Khan's son also conquered and held this area for a long time. You had all the people scattered, but you had also a lot of people remaining here. And it kind of became a culture of Jews, of pagans, of then Christians, because you had the Roman Empire pretty much converting to Christianity. And then you finally, probably the biggest thing was you had, during the Christian Crusades, you had Saladin, who essentially pushed the Christians out of Jerusalem during the First and Second Crusades. You had him coming over here and conquering this, and he was an Egyptian warlord holding it. And then eventually you get to the point that the Turkish, known as the Young Turks, conquered and held most of this land. And so it was under Turkish control. So, Brian, what am I saying by all of this? I'm saying that that little strip of land has been held by probably 40 different civilizations over the course of its history.
No doubt about that. I mean, and the thing that is remarkable is, I mean, you and I were talking about this backstage. There is no such thing as a pure Palestinian,
No,
because
they're
you've got literally every kind of ethnicity and nationality mixed in. You've
you
got
had
Greek, you have Roman, you have Canaanite, you have
your
everything.
Turks,
Syrians.
the descendants of the uh, Babylonians, the Assyrians. You
Hmm.
have, goodness, Genghis Khan's son. So you have Asian mixed in
Yep.
there. You
Yep.
have European, and then when the Jews kind of got scattered and they went off into Europe and formed, the different types of Jews. You had the Jews that remained in the Arab lands that have always lived there. You had the ones that went off to Spain. Then you have the ones that went off to Germany and became the Ashkenazi Jews. Then you had all of them coming back, and you had a great European influence there. So,
Mm.
bottom line, there's always been a Jewish presence there. And there's always been these peoples of Palestine there, but they don't have one cohesive nationality
Yeah, very true.
or
And but
one cohesive religion.
or
There's
yeah, or one
Christians, there's
cohesive. Yeah.
Jews, there's Muslims.
Yeah, and or you have atheists and agnostics, but in that part of the world, being an atheist or an agnostic doesn't really pay, because there's way. I mean, people have tried to figure out for years, what are the origins of this conflict. You know, we were talking backstage, I should say. My research went back to like the late 1800s. If you take a look at it from Tracy's perspective, this conflict has been going on for a good 3,000-4,000 years,
Hmm.
and basically has to do with a dispute between two sons of Abraham. And
Right.
ever since then, it's just it's devolved and evolved down through the centuries, the millennia, and now we're sitting in a situation where you've got wars, rumors of wars, conflicts, skirmishes, agreements, accords. You got every stinking possibility of a thing going on that little strip of land. It's
Hmm.
remarkable. It's genuinely remarkable. Um, but anyway, I'll throw it back to you, my dear.
Okay. And then you have, no, I mean, when I say that, Morning Mayhem, I mean literally his one of his
Hmm.
actual sons that he claimed as a legitimate heir conquered this place. It's not like, I know that probably majority of the people in the world can trace their lineage back to Genghis Khan, but this was like legitimately one of his heirs. So
Hmm.
then, oh, I know. I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm not just saying that to throw it out there. But then enter the modern era. You have the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which is basically Turks or Turkey coming in and crushing the Byzantine Empire, which is the remains of the old Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, the Western Empire fell, and Western Europe, you had Gaul, you had Britannia, you had all of those places. They fell into what we know as the Dark Ages and became the countries of Germany, France, Great Britain, all of that. And then Italy, and then you have on the eastern side, you had the eastern side of the empire, which comprised the Middle East, becoming the Byzantine Empire, which was a Orthodox Christian empire that was there for hundreds of years alongside the Dark Ages. And then you finally had them being conquered by an Islamic regime known as the Turks, and they became the Ottoman Turks and the Ottoman Empire. So
Hmm.
that part of the land was controlled by the Ottomans. Now, fast forward to the late 1800s, you had a whole lot of anti Semitism all over the world, and you had Jews that wanted to return to their native soil of the Middle East.
Yep.
And so you had a huge exodus of Jews from Europe and from other parts of the Middle East to this area where the ancient Canaanites or the ancient Israelites had once lived. You had them making backdoor deals with the Arabs that already lived there. They had kind of always been there, buying land, and you had a huge influx. Well, you had some Arabs that were just happy as pie to have them there, and you had some that weren't so happy as pie to have them there, and you had a whole lot of conflict going on. Then you had the build up to World War One, and then in which the Ottomans joined with Germany, and they're out in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire to fight France, Great Britain, and the United States. And the United States, Great Britain, and France won that war. And as a result, it was pretty much the death row to the Ottoman Empire, who was already struggling economically and socially. So it fell apart, and you had literally the formation of many of the modern Middle Eastern countries that you have today: Syria, Jordan, Iraq, even Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE. You had the formation of those eventually. But pretty much when it first happened, you had Jordan. Jordan was the main one, and Syria. And so you had this huge swath of land. You still had Jews wanting part of it. You had these, I don't want to, mixed race people. As bad as that sounds, but there's a whole conglomeration of cultures there that wanted it, that were not Jews, that wanted this land. And so you had a whole lot of give and take. And eventually you had Great Britain, who was given that swap of land, them and France, pushed into a corner. They wanted to please the Jews, they wanted to please the Arabs, and they wanted to please their allies. So you had 4 different plans of how to divide that up. They couldn't really get any of them off the ground. So so basically what happened, you had this whole disputed area. You had Jews wanting to move in because of what was starting to happen now in the lead up to World War II with the Holocaust and all that. You had them limiting Jewish immigration from Europe to this area to 75,000 a year. Well, you had millions wanting to get out of Europe. So you had a lot of people sneaking in and doing, again, backdoor deals. You had these Arabs who were pretty much siding with the Nazis because they wanted the Jews completely eliminated and out of their land. So you had a whole lot of wars and little skirmishes. You had Arabs fighting on behalf of the Germans. You had the Jews cozying up to the Brits, fighting with the Brits against these Nazi sympathizing people, terrorists here. And then eventually you have these 4 plans to divide this country up that still left in 1948, long after World War II was over. And what did Britain do? I'm out of it. They gave it to the United Nations and said, you come up with a plan. And basically you come up with this weird plan to give Israel a swath of land here, a swath of land down here, the Arabs a swath of land over here, with Jerusalem in the middle as an international city. Basically, Israel said, we'll take whatever you'll give us. We just want to get our people out of countries that hate them. The Arabs weren't having it, and so you had the 6-Day War, the 1948 war that broke out just after that broke out, and you had Israel defeating literally every other Arab country around there in that war and taking more land. But what you'll see on this is that every time Israel has to defend themselves and they end up conquering more land, they always give it back.
Mm-hmm.
They just want that country. And I know I sound like I've never made any bones about it. I'm definitely a Zionist. I believe that the Jews should have their land, and I believe the Arabs should have their land. I definitely believe, but I believe that Israel has a right to exist. And so from that point forward, you have war after war. And every time Israel would take a little bit more and they give it back, you had Palestinians electing governments that and forming organizations that fought for their rights, such as the PLO and now Hamas. that control that region waging war against Israel and vice versa. And so basically we get to where we are today. 2005, you had Israel completely pull all of their people out of all the contested lands, Gaza, West Bank. The only thing they kept, I believe, was the Golan Heights, because they have to
Yeah.
have that strategically, militarily. Pulling everything out and just letting them have it. In the midst of all this, you have all these wars with all these different Arab countries that have expelled all of their Jews, and all the Jews fled to Israel. Then you also have all these countries also expelling all of these Arabs or Palestinians that are not native to their country, expelling them as well into the Gaza Strip, because they're associated with these organizations like the PLO, Fatah, and Hamas that were trying to overthrow the governments of some of these other countries, like Jordan, like Egypt. They didn't want them, so they pretty much exiled them out to Palestinian or Palestine, Gaza. And so now you have this stalemate where you have this. It's not even a peace. It's guerrilla warfare and terrorist warfare.
Yeah.
Enter Iran, who to me is the big troublemaker in the area, that wants control of the whole area, wants to eliminate the Jews. They are whispering in the ear of these other organizations that we cannot recognize, we cannot appease, we cannot, work with Jews. We need to get rid of them. So you have Israel accepting every single peace deal and division plan for a two-state solution up into, I think, 2005. We'll take it. We'll take whatever you give us, giving the Palestinians at least 90% of everything that they wanted, and the Palestinians just walking away from the table.
Yep.
Or not the Palestinians, the Palestinian representation, which are terrorist organizations, walking away from the table. And now you have Iran, which is felt emboldened because of weakness of the United States and its allies in the area, afraid of the Abraham Accords, in which you had major Muslim powers such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan about to recognize Israel, and eventually leading to what I believe would have been a mutual protection pact. They can't have that because that would put them on the ropes. And so they take all this money that was given to them by the United States, and they launch the October 7th attack on Israel to blow up the entire region. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, and now if everybody's listening to this live stream and you're thinking, "Man, that's a lot." Oh, let me tell you something.
There's more. We can't do it all.
This thing has got more twists and turns than a negotiation over a prenup between J-Lo and Ben Affleck. Okay, that's how bad this thing is. For the side of it that I'm going to focus on, at least for a little bit, is the geopolitical side of it. And this piece of real estate, and Tracy, if you do me a favor, I dropped a map in private chat. Would you throw that one up on the screen for everybody's benefit?
Sure.
Because this will help, at least for purposes of the conversation. I'll give you the signal to take the thing down. But folks, we're talking about a piece of real estate that you could drive through, and basically, if you went from one end of it to the other, like let's say from the Lebanon, at the top of it in Lebanon, down to Egypt, you could probably drive through the thing in the space of about 2.5, 3 hours. Mm-hmm. You could drive the width of it in maybe hour and a half. We're not talking about a lot of land here, but it has probably been the most battled over piece of real estate of anywhere else in the world. And that's going on now for probably 4 millennia, at least. Mm-hmm. Now, the fascinating thing about all this, and Tracy brings it up, quite appropriately, the Jewish people, even after the diaspora that happened, you could argue at the tail end of the Roman occupation in 70 AD, there have been enclaves of Jewish people in and around Palestine, which is what it was known for many years, enclaves of Jewish people for centuries. Now, Tracy, if you want to take that down, that's fine. When the Ottomans controlled Palestine, and they had it basically for 400 years, basically from the period of I'll call it the 1500s up to the early part of the 20th century. again, small little enclaves of Jewish people, maybe, a town here, a village there. But slowly but surely, as the Jewish people, either individually or collectively, began to acquire wealth, they started to buy back plots of land in their old native country. Not huge amounts per se, but enough to start a new village, enough to start a couple
Mhm.
of villages maybe side by side together.
And if you look at a map from the time that the resettlement was happening, you'll see swaths of Jewish settlements and swaths of Arab settlements or Muslim settlements
Yep.
all
Yep.
throughout this land.
Absolutely. So along comes the First World War, and the Ottoman Empire being aligned with Germany and Italy at the time, because of an agreement that they had already reached before the beginnings of the First World War. The Ottomans sided in with the Germans. Well, history now knows they lost. And with that came an interesting problem for the Allies. Well, I shouldn't call it a problem. It was, how do we divide up the conquered land? Because let's be honest, the Ottoman Empire stretched all the way from Turkey all the way, clear across to the
Tip
Tigris
of
and
Africa.
Euphrates River,
Yeah.
to the tip of Africa. How do we divide this stuff up? Well, they found a way to do it, and in doing so, the British got their hands on Palestine. Now, at the tail end of the First World War, there was a British foreign minister named Balfour, who is remembered for many different things, but one of them is a simple statement that set in motion 30 years of events that in the end led to the formation of the modern nation of Israel. What he penned was the Balfour Declaration, it's commonly called. Basically, the Balfour Declaration went something like this. Boy, it would be really nice if there were a land for the Jewish people to go home to. It didn't establish anything. It didn't say, here you go. No, it just said, yeah, it'd be pretty good if we set this up as a goal. And what that set in motion for the next 30 years was a lot of studies, committees. There was violence. There was back and forth because even though no formal nation had been set up yet, there was already battles over territory. At one point, the Arabs that controlled the majority of the land, or I should say, owned it. Britain controlled it. The Arabs owned it. The Arabs were like, nope, we're not selling any more land to the Jewish people. Forget it. We're not going to do it. Oh, okay. Well, then comes the Second World War. And as history rightly remembers, 6 million Jews died at the hands of the Germans. So you have a significant number, a significant number of Jewish survivors in Central and Eastern Europe who are like, we're out of here. We got to get out. We got to go somewhere. You have the Allies feeling a significant amount of guilt because they didn't realize this was happening, or if they did, they didn't move fast enough to stop it. And everyone's wondering, what the heck are we going to do here? Well, along comes the United Nations. And in 1947, they set about a committee to study what the possibilities were of setting up a homeland for the Jewish people. Nothing was done until 1948. On May 14th, 1948 is the birth date of the modern state of Israel, and there was an Israeli Declaration of Independence. The very next day, on the 15th of May, 1948, every Arab nation surrounding Israel went to war with the newly formed country and promptly got their rear ends kicked. And in doing so, Israel acquired territory. But it didn't just stop there. From about 1948, even up into the late 1970s, you had varying crises that went on. I mean, for example, you have the Suez Canal crisis of 1956, where you had a fight over the canal and control of the flow of commerce through the Red Sea. You had the Six-Day War in 1967. You had the War of Yom Kippur in 1973, which ultimately, finally, after the Egyptians got their rear ends kicked, they said, okay, look,
Not just
They've got
that, the Israelis pushed almost to Cairo. They could have
yes,
easily taken over Egypt at that point.
they had control by the time the early 1970s had rolled around at the end of the Yom Kippur War. The Israelis basically had what they've got now, including the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula, which meant that the Israelis, had they decided to keep it, would have been right on Egypt's front door. Basically, they could have lobbed something across the Suez and the Nile River and be like, oh, okay, here you go. You want something? You want a Christmas present? Shalom. Here you go.
But the United Nations, as they do, ask them to pull back.
Well, but in the end, it also took an agreement between then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat under the auspices of Jimmy Carter. And this is one of the better things that he did during his presidency. The Camp David Accords led to an agreement where the Israelis did just that. They pulled back from the Sinai Peninsula and they basically handed it back over to the Egyptians. And for years, and really even since then, the Egyptians and the Israelis have not been at each other's throats. There's been some tension. There's been some tight moments, but by and large, that more or less ended it between the Egyptians and the Israelis.
But
You
then,
can't go ahead.
oh no, and then that is where you have the Palestinians, or more correctly, Hamas or Fatah,
Mm-hmm.
the PLO fractions in Egypt. They tried to overthrow the Egyptian government, and they were expelled.
Yeah,
And no other Arab country wanted them, so they ended up back in the Gaza Strip.
Now, by and large, by the end of the 1970s, the nations surrounding Israel had more or less decided, okay, we're not getting anywhere with these folks. We may dislike them. We may dislike the fact that they're on what we consider to be Arab land, but there ain't no moving them out. And different Arab leaders, of course, take different views on this. I mean, the late King Hussein of Jordan was constantly trying to find a way. Hey, can we find a way to make this thing work? Can we find some kind of peace agreement? Even offering up ideas back in the late 60s and early 70s, even up until the time of his death. Hussein of Jordan was constantly working to try to get peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But notice what I said. The nations had more or less given up on the idea of a conflict with the Israelis. That's the difference, though. What's going on right now isn't necessarily a fight between nations as much as it is a fight between peoples. Now, what I'm getting at is this. The Palestinian problem has been around, like I said, well, you can make an argument going back, 4 millennia. Really, it's been in earnest since the late 1800s. And the problem is, everybody loves to claim the Palestinians. No one wants to live with the Palestinians. Now, here's what I'm getting at. If you go back and look throughout history, the Palestinians are, how do I want to put this? The Palestinians are more or less, your Uncle Buck. You like to see him come visit, but you don't want him to hang around too long. That's what they are to the Arab world. Nobody wants them. If you don't believe me, the Jordanians kicked them out in the late 1960s. The Egyptians kicked them out in the 70s. The Lebanese have kicked them out. The Syrians have kicked them out. The Kuwaitis kicked them out in the first Gulf War. 200,000 people were making a passage across the Arabian desert to get back to the Gaza Strip. Now, that's the sort of the irony of the situation. Everybody's like, oh, we want peace. We want peace. Well, you guys want peace so much, everybody's trying to get rid of you. So is it a them problem or a you problem? Well, the Arab world is more or less convinced where the Palestinians are concerned, it's a you problem. Now, that sort of begs the question, where do you put them? Well, the Israelis, more or less said, all right, we got this strip of land here. I guess this is where you're going. We occupy it, but okay. Now, from inside Gaza, economically speaking, this is not exactly a powerhouse. More or less, the Gaza Strip exists at the goodwill of fellow Arab nations. Hamas, which politically controls the Gaza Strip and has since the early 2000s, is not exactly setting the world on fire trying to make the quality of life better for the people inside the Gaza Strip. Oh, yeah. You basically have roughly 2 million people inside the Gaza Strip, and realistically, they need a piece of land. The Sinai Peninsula would be fantastic because it would solve the problem for everybody.
But Egypt will not give it to them.
Egypt will not give it to them because the Egyptians remember very well these guys tried to overthrow their government. Believe me, the legendary Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization,
Mm,
for maybe the past 20 years, because he's been dead, he's looked upon more favorably in the memory of Arabs. When he was alive, he was the biggest hemorrhoid walking God's earth.
exactly. And where does Hamas come from? Hamas, okay, from the PLO, you had two. After Yasser Arafat died, you had the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was a terrorist organization in its own right. It
Exactly.
split into two factions. You had the former supporters of Yasser Arafat
Mm-hmm.
became Fatah, and then you had what is now currently Hamas, which is even more radical than Yasser Arafat, and they are the ones that unfortunately got control of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, Yasser Arafat died in 2004, shortly after elections were held in the Palestinian Authority, which is what's commonly called. And like Tracy said, Hamas got their hands on the power. Fatah, which was headed up by Mahmoud Abbas, who's the current PLA prime minister, is more or less a figurehead. He doesn't have a whole lot of power. Hamas runs the Gaza Strip. Now, for a period of time, it the influence of Hamas ebbs and flows depending on how economically powerful they are. There was a period from 2017 to maybe 2021 when Hamas more or less had their horns pulled in. Gee, I wonder what period of time that coincided with, but we'll lay that aside for a moment. Um, it is a situation that's no good to anybody. The Israelis basically would love to have the entirety of their country, which would be the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, under Israeli control. But what do you do with the Palestinians? And this is the problem no one can figure out. There have been, for decades, negotiated ideas about how to do this, but I'm not so sure that the problem here is totally the fault of the Israelis as much as it is the Palestinians. And I'll give you a perfect example. In the late 1990s, Bill Clinton, as one of the last acts of his presidency, was trying desperately to get a peace deal done between the Israelis and the Palestinians. He invited then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak to Camp David to meet with Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO. Ehud Barak came with the most stunning proposal ever handed to the PLO. And it basically went like this: we will give you the following. We'll give you the West Bank. We'll pull our people out. We'll give you control of half of Jerusalem. We'll give you everything you want. Now, you would think that having fought for all this,
Including the Temple Mount, which is
including
very
the
highly
Temple Mount,
contested.
highly contested. Now, you would think that Yasser Arafat, upon hearing that he was being offered everything he said he was working for since the 1960s, you would think that he would snatch it up in a heartbeat. Turned it down. Clinton was beside himself. He couldn't believe it. Basically, what it got down to, although no one's ever officially said it, basically what it got down to is Arafat didn't want to be in charge. In other words, he'd be responsible for taking out the trash. If you've ever seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, you know the line I'm referring to. The other issue, has been speculated by some, is he saw what happened to Anwar Sadat. Because if you remember, Anwar Sadat was assassinated after making peace with the Israelis. Arafat wasn't going to take that chance. So he's like, nope. So there have been peace deals that have been offered up for years, but no one's been able to quite figure out what exactly to do. Now, just to kind of wrap up my side of it, we were talking about this backstage. One of the things that President Trump did in his time in office is he worked a solution that went from the outside in as opposed to the inside out. Now, what am I getting at? Basically this. For years, everybody's been trying to figure out how to get the Palestinians and the Israelis to get along with each other. Trump came along and said, let's try something else. He started setting up economic agreements between Israel and other nations so that basically what would happen was the Palestinians would be isolated, meaning everybody's got a reason to keep the peace on the basis of economics, not necessarily politics. And it would force them, the shall we say, signatories to these agreements that Trump struck, to basically look at the Palestinians and go, hey, look, what you guys are doing right now, the Intifada, all the other stuff, it's bad for business. Cool it. And it almost would have worked had certain things not happened in 2020. But anyway, yeah, the geopolitics of this thing is just absolutely crazy and has been for centuries.
And then you have what we have today, which is basically Hamas and their brothers, their retarded brothers, Hezbollah, which are basically, both of them are being used by the Iranians to wage a proxy war against Israel. Yep. Because Iran are Shiite Muslims and they literally hate Jews and want to see them eradicated off the face of the earth. Whereas you have the Sunni countries around there, your Saudi Arabias, your United Arab Emirates, they're more like they will work with the Jews based off of economics.
Yep. And then you've got people trying to stir that hornet's nest who would love nothing better than to get a war going with the Iranians. And I'm sorry, that's one of the worst ideas in the world. The Iranians are just within an ace of getting their hands on a nuclear weapon, and some of the people in that government just might be crazy enough to try and set one off.
So the best thing is to, again, bring the rest of the region together, and you effectively neutralize Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. You just neutralize them. Take them out, isolate them, and they'll just die on the vine, as you said, backstage.
Well, and the other thing is, to broaden the discussion out to the Iranians for just a moment, if they did not have access to money and oil or revenue they could get from selling oil, you give it enough time, that government will fall apart. There have been so many moments in recent history, 2009, 2019, etc., when the people of Iran were crying out to the West, just give us support. We're not asking you to fight this battle for us. Just stand up and say, we stand in solidarity with the people of Iran. We want them to be free. It might have, if you can make an argument that if Barack Obama had done that in 2009, the regime in Tehran would have fallen. Because
exactly. Look at pictures of Iran from when the Shah was in control. Yeah, the Shah was a puppet for the West. But I think the lives of the Iranian people were much better under the Shah.
Yeah, and this is, and you and I know mutually know of a content creator, Nina Infinity. Her family is from Iran. They will, she has commented on this on more than one occasion. Iran, before the Ayatollah got a hold of it in 1979, was basically almost like a Western country. It was one of those very unique islands in the Middle East that if the theocrats hadn't got a hold of the government yet and turned the crazies loose. There was a standard of living in Iran that rivaled anywhere in the world.
Even better than, like, UAE is a very rich country, but UAE still has a lot of Sharia law going on, and so the lives of certain types of people are not the greatest in the UAE, but they're certainly a higher standard than they are in Iran. But you had Iran, if you walked in, I've seen pictures of Iran, it literally looked like any city in the United States or Great Britain.
Absolutely. And like I say, the standard of living was much better. The country was at peace. Yes, the Shah was a dictator, but you know what? He was our dictator. He was minding the store, and we weren't having to worry about it. Then the crazies took over, or more or less we helped them take over by the fact that we led to the deposing of the Shah, and the Middle East hasn't been the same ever since.
Well, also, Saddam Hussein was our dictator for a long time. So was Gaddafi, until they got off their chain and went rogue, and then we had to take them out. I'm not going to sit here and say that the United States and its allies hasn't done some crap in our time, but how do you keep your people in the first world? By doing some crap.
Yeah. We have used people like the Shah of Iran, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. We don't like to think about it, or more to the point, we don't necessarily dwell on it as Americans, but we've used them as the counterbalance to hold off crazy. That was one of the things that made W's Gulf War maddening, because by taking out Saddam, you took out the counterbalance against Iran
Hmm.
for a good 15 years.
Yeah.
Saddam
Yeah.
Hussein and the country of Iraq held Iran in check.
Yeah. You had the Iran and Iraq War. It was terrible for both those countries, but it kept some sort of stabilization in the Middle East, for good or bad.
And when we took out Saddam, that opened the floodgates for the Iranians to go further into the West and just cause all kinds of havoc. People think about Gaddafi, and believe me, he was no saint by any stretch. But Gaddafi, toward the end of uh, George W. Bush's term in office, was actually feeding us intel about certain things going on in the Middle East. But like, all right, you need to keep an eye on this. Watch out for that cat, and you probably ought to do something about this situation over here. What did we do? No. Gaddafi bad. Let's take him out. And now what's happened to Libya? The crazies have got a hold of Libya and the oil. So not good. Sometimes we are our own worst enemies here in the United States for the
Yeah.
short-sightedness that we exercise.
Yep.
But going back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the current war right now that started last October 7th is the actions of the United States, and this is just my opinion, the actions of the United States are extraordinarily hypocritical in this respect. When we were attacked on 9/11, nobody, and I mean nobody in the world, looked at us and said, well, maybe you ought to think about fighting the war this way, or maybe you ought to back off. No, everybody realized they're mad. Don't get in their way. Yet where the Israelis are concerned, we don't mind telling the Israelis, now look here, you can't launch these shells into this area, and if there are bad guys in this hospital, you can't blow a hole in it and kill
And no
them.
ground invasions, and
And
yeah.
no ground invasion. No. You can't be doing that. And the Israelis are like, you guys weren't the ones shot at. We were. Your people weren't killed. Ours were killed. We'll
And then
settle this in
you
whatever
got
way we want.
Netanyahu, who finally said, "I'm just doing what I need to do."
Yeah. He's like,
And
let us finish the job.
and do I feel terrible for the regular Palestinians
Mm-hmm.
in Gaza? Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And people say, "Well, why didn't they evacuate?" Because most cases, Hamas holds them hostage. They won't let them evacuate. They use them as human shields. And Hamas itself, they're too retarded to realize it. They're being used by the Iranians. The Iranians don't care about them. They're expendable.
And here's the other question. Where are the Palestinians going to go? Now, I mean, it would be a legitimate strategy. It'd be a legitimate strategy if someone would let them in their border. But the Egyptians were like, When that whole thing broke out last October, the Egyptians were like, nope, don't come in here. Nope. We've got the border sealed and you're not crossing it. I mean, at one point it was so bad, the Egyptians wouldn't even let humanitarian aid go across their border. That's how bad it got, because the memory of what the Palestinians tried to do to them years ago was still very fresh in their minds. So even if they did give an evacuation order,
They can
what
go right up to
country
the
in the Middle
border
East?
and they have to stop. They just
Yeah,
have to stop and sit
to
there.
what country do the Palestinians go where they're going to find peace? No one will let them stay there long enough. It's not going to happen.
And it's terrible. What do? We
Yeah.
And it goes back to what Netanyahu has said: you have to eliminate Hamas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get rid of Hamas and let cooler heads prevail. You can
Yeah.
have an Arab state right there that can work with the other Arab nations and Israel and have a thriving economy and a thriving people, and that's what we want.
Yeah, and a lot of people forget about the fact that when the Israelis really got a hold of their ancestral land, that land, according to reports, if you believe accounts, that land was extraordinarily fertile. That land, you could grow anything on it. The Arabs just absolutely trashed the joint from, like, let's say 70 AD up until, like, the late 19th century. But when the Israelis began to cultivate the land again, it began to flourish. Now, I'm not saying it's the Garden of Eden by any stretch, don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
But my point is this: the Gaza Strip is an economic wasteland. The only way they're surviving is by the good graces of their fellow brother Arab nations, who
And
basically give
Israel, as
them
long as
money.
there was peace,
And,
Israel
and,
issued more work permits to
mhm,
Palestinians than any other country. They would let them go across the borders with ease to work in Israel. They would
yep.
treat them at their hospitals. They gave them money to set up infrastructure, and instead Hamas used it to build tunnels and weapons to attack Israel.
Which is all the more reason that if Hamas were not there, and God forbid, do I want to see any more killing in the world? No, I don't. But if Hamas were defeated militarily, such that the people of the Gaza Strip could have a free and fair election, absent any influence from Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran,
Mhm.
such that they can make peace with the government of Israel and start working together cooperatively, it would be amazing to see what would happen between the ingenuity of the Arab people in the Gaza Strip and the Israelis, what they could come up with.
Amen, brother. And you know that look at the demographics of Israel. Israel
Mhm.
is 22% Arab.
Yep.
People want to say it's not a completely Jewish state. It's like 74% Jewish, 22% Arab, and then you have Christians and agnostics and atheists
Yeah.
making up the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny part about it is, and Benjamin Netanyahu has made this point over the years, although most people don't remember what he has said, and that is one of the most peaceful places in the world is the nation of Israel. Not because you have peace between the Jewish people, you have the peace between Jewish and Arab people who live in Israel. Arabs and Muslims who live inside Israel, he's like, as long as they're
They're
obeying the
Israeli
law, we don't.
citizens. They're
They're Israeli
Israeli citizens.
citizens. We don't care. As long as they're not, tearing up anything or causing trouble, fine. We don't care. They're, Arabs are actually citizens of our country.
Yeah.
You know,
And and let me give a little word out there to all my LGBTQIA plus minus sign divided side parentheses people
give a word, sister.
for Palestine. Take that over to the Gaza Strip and see what kind of reception you got. You will take the quickest flight off the tallest building they can find really quickly. Say that in any of the other Muslim countries around there. Same thing. Go to
Uh-huh.
Israel. There's gay pride flags hanging all over the place in Tel Aviv and
Yep.
Jerusalem.
Yep.
They have gay pride every year. They have gay pride parades. We are welcome in Israel. So, as a gay person, who am I going to stand with? Israel.
Yeah.
They are a Western country.
Yep.
And you know what? If we could find a way to get Hamas out of there and get the regular old Palestinian people a chance to thrive, they might become a Western country too.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I said, I hate to say it this way, but the theocracy of Islamic nations, and I'm thinking of Iran as the primary example, you could make an argument that the theocracy has just ruined places like Iran and others. I'm not, I don't,
As a Christian, I don't want a Christian theocracy in the United States. I'm a
exactly.
Christian, but I don't want a Christian theocracy because you've got crazies in every religion that take it way too far. I don't
Well,
want a Christian theocracy here.
and I have not a problem, one, with the idea of Christian value influencing the actions of government. I don't have a
Or
problem with that.
or
But the
even in their
idea of,
country's Muslim values and and I don't have a problem
exactly.
with that. But when
Yeah.
you take your law word for word from
Yep.
a scripture that was written thousands of years ago, therein lies the problem.
Exactly. And yeah, it's a crying shame to watch what's happening because you have generations of people being taught to hate each other that really, if the hornet's nest weren't stirred, yeah, the hornet's nest would be there, but people wouldn't get stung by it.
Yeah, and I've talked to many of my friends who are retired military that
Yep.
tell me exactly what goes on because they've been in Afghanistan, they've been in
Mhm.
Gaza, they've been in Israel. They tell me the differences.
Yep.
They hate Hamas, and I'm sure all the other Iranian proxies,
Hezbollah, yep.
all
The
of them
Houthis, yeah.
teach children from the earliest age to hate Israel. There is
Yeah.
cartoons and kid shows over there showing
Yep.
Jews and Christians as evil people. You know,
Jeez.
so it's just, and so what is have we solved this crisis? No, but there is things that can be done by a strong Western government that could get in there and show some real leadership. Yeah, we need a
Absolutely.
strong Western government that can do that.
And not just one of them either. It can't just be the United States. The
No, it's got
British
to
have a
be
part to play in this. The French have a part to play in this.
the entire United
All of
Nations.
Western, all of
Russia,
Western.
China, we all have a part to play in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a chance for peace in that region if we can find the way to, turn the combination on the lock.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So
that's
we'll
so.
see.
Bottom line. Yes, the word Palestine does appear in the historic record, but
Yep.
not the way that you think. It originated with the Romans taking a poke at the Jews. So, what can you say? Which which people has had a country there for eons in some form, had an actual nation there? Israel.
Yep.
I hate
Yep.
to give it to all you people that are more radical on the other side, but Israel is the only one in this conflict that has had a country there for millennia. And by
And
right of conquest, they have the land that they have. That is the most important thing. Every nation in the world today is that way because of right of conquest. And this war or that war, they took that land for their people. And that goes all the way back to the Native Americans. They took it from somebody else.
yep.
If you're going to undo that, you have to undo the entire world as we know it, and that's not going to happen.
No. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in the coming days and weeks and years ahead. I mean, if the Israelis are allowed to finish off Hamas over the protestations of the Biden administration, let's see what happens. We've got a chance. But you let a weed hang around, and sooner or later it gets to be a bigger weed. So either you've got to eradicate Hamas completely, or you let any part of it hang around, it will come back to haunt you.
Same thing about what Israel's invasion of Lebanon. They're
Yep.
allowing Hezbollah to control their border right there next to Israel. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't want Israel to invade your country, you need to put your military, the Lebanese military, needs to take care of Hezbollah. Get
Yep.
rid of them. That won't happen. Same with Yemen, with the Houthi. Get rid of them. You're letting a terrorist organization use your border as a staging ground.
Yep.
So if you don't want Israel to fight back, it's like that meme where the monkey hits the lion. The monkey hits the lion and then wants a peace deal. It doesn't work
Yep.
that way. You've got to you've got to take out the trash yourself if you don't want Israel to do it.
Yeah. And if the Israelis do it, they're going to do it quite thoroughly. I
They're going to do it
have
their
no doubt.
way, and
Yep.
unfortunately, they do the best they can do to not hit civilians.
Yep.
A whole heck of a lot better than any of the other aforementioned people do. They make it a
Very true.
point to hit civilians, but
Absolutely.
they do a very good job of pinpointing just military targets. But unfortunately, civilians die in war, and that's a sad thing.
Or you have Hamas using civilians and civilian areas as protection for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what do you do? Okay, at some point, either we're going to level this building, or we're going to get killed ourselves.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah.
It's a very bad situation. Very bad situation.
And I agree with you. I think economics is the key. If you isolate Gaza or Hamas, if you isolate Iran, they'll eventually die on the vine because you've got a whole lot of people in Iran that still remember the way it was under the Shah, and they probably
Mhm.
want that again.
And they'd love to have the chance to bring it back if they could just take the regime down. But the regime stays in power because they have access to money, which buys them arms and armies and everything else.
Yeah.
Iran is right there. If Iran goes down, this is, 21st century domino theory. If Iran goes down, a lot of the problems in the Middle East tend to start solving themselves.
Because you have
It really does.
the more advanced nations like Egypt, UAE,
Jordan, yep.
Saudi Arabia especially, that want to work with
Mhm.
the West because that's where the economic future is.
Yep.
Same with
Absolutely.
India. If it came down to a choice between the West and China, I think India is on our side because they want because of the economics of it.
Yep.
And they want all that land for their people because India's got a lot of people they need to spread out.
Well, oh yeah. Yeah, they don't have problems making babies in India.
No.
No, no. So
So,
yeah,
you take out Iran, I think that solves a lot of our geopolitical problems. That puts a little bit of a muzzle on Russia, and it also makes China back down some too.
exactly. And Robert Lowry brings up a really valid point. Biden and Obama were the one that gave them the billions of dollars that they're working with now.
Yep.
Whereas if we'd have had 4 more years of Trump isolating and choking the money off from Iran, it'd be real interesting to see what would happen after 8 years of that. How much really could the Iranians have done, or how weak would the regime have been? We'll never
If
know.
we can get another 4 years and then we get a similar administration for the next couple of terms, I think we'll see a whole new Middle East.
Oh, I agree with that. Absolutely. So, but yeah,
Well,
it'll be very interesting to watch.
absolutely. Well, everyone, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Y'all know where to find me. Again, Brian, tell them where to find you.
You can find me on Rumble. You can find me on YouTube. I will be back tomorrow night on my channel at 7:30 Eastern for Chatting on the Porch. And we are going to do this again on my channel next Wednesday night. We'll do it. We'll do it at 6:00 for the sake of Tracy. But yeah, we're going to be doing this on my channel, talking politics and stuff and news. So yeah, if you're not finding me on my channels on Rumble and YouTube, find me on Twitter at the Front Porch C1.
All right. Buddy, well, you know where to find me. Like I said, we'll be back. We're going to do this weekly. One week it'll be on my channel. The next week it'll be on Brian's. We'll talk about a variety of subjects, sometimes politics, sometimes history, sometimes movies. Sometimes we'll just shoot the shit. It'll be a whole lot of fun.
There you go.
And until then, everyone, have a great night. Gen X.
Ta-ta.